seems so long ago. Seems so far away, but it's as clear as though it happened yesterday. Another man is gone. He didn't last the night, but he helped us see the dawn and the light.
Mark Lane, attorney and author of the book Rush to Judgment.
The assassination of President Kennedy was not just a national tragedy, but an event of historic and heroic dimensions. Minor characters on life's stage are profoundly affected when men of heroic stature are struck down. And through the observations of such minor characters in life as in drama, there is much we may learn from the event. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern were but inadvertent messengers in the tragedy of Hamlet, but like Roger Craig, they were swept away by events they could not control, could in fact barely fathom. During this program, we will witness events many of us would like to forget. Well over a decade after the murder, perplexing questions still remain deep in the American consciousness, and we cannot forget, just as Roger Craig could not forget. This program is, in a sense, the story of a man whose dedication to the truth epitomized the moral fiber of an ordinary person. Roger Craig.
Roger Dean Craig, former Dallas County Deputy Sheriff, winner of the Man of the Year Award in 1960 for law enforcement in recognition of outstanding performance in the line of duty.
Roger Craig was a trained, alert, and instinctive police officer. He was interviewed by Lincoln Carl in April 1974.
Where were you on the day of the assassination of John Kennedy?
I was standing out in front of the sheriff's office, which at that time was at 505 Main Street. They've moved it since then, but it was at 505 Main Street, directly in front of the front door.
Was the motorcade passing that area at that time?
No, we had to wait about 15 minutes before the motorcade arrived, but the sheriff had sent us out there that early to wait.
Were you merely a spectator, or were you on duty?
Well, no, I was on duty, but a couple hours before Kennedy was to arrive, the sheriff called us in, what I call the street people, the plainclothesmen, the detectives, and he instructed us that we were to stand out in front and in no way take part in the security of that motorcade, that we were merely spectators and nothing more.
Did that seem unusual to you?
It did to me at the time, because there were so many people around and so few Dallas police officers. This is one of the first things I noticed, was the lack of Dallas police officers. Try to keep the people back.
Adlai Stevenson, who had been assaulted in Dallas the previous month, and others, including Congressman Henry Gonzalez from San Antonio, Texas, had warned President Kennedy not to travel through Dallas. But the Secret Service told the president that he had nothing to worry about, since the greatest security in the history of the country for an American president, comprised of the coordination of all the local and federal police, had been set up for Dallas. Yet Roger Craig, an intelligent, instinctive police officer, and many other police officers were specifically told not to take part in the security that day. And Dallas-based FBI agent James Hosty, assigned to Lee Harvey Oswald, who had just returned from the Soviet Union, Oswald, who was a high security threat by FBI standards. Mr. Hosty had no assignment to protect the president that day either. Hosty told a congressional investigating committee many years later that he was having lunch down the street when the president was killed. the greatest security ever? Even the normal security on both the federal and local levels had been stripped away.
The president came by, and they made the right turn onto Houston Street. And, I'll say, a few seconds later, give them time to get to Elm Street and make the left, I heard what I call a report, a gunshot. And I said, oh my God. And I turned and started toward Houston Street, running just as hard as I could. And I was probably 15 steps from Houston Street. And before I reached those 15 steps, I heard 2 more reports.
Then you arrived at Elm Street.
Right.
Okay, what did you see?
Well, there was a Dallas police officer running up the grassy knoll to the picket fence. So I immediately assumed the motorcade had left by then. And I immediately assumed that he knew something about the shots, or he wouldn't have been headed for the picket fence. So I followed him.
Were you aware the president had been hit?
Not at that time. Now, people were mentioning the president was shot, and someone else said a Secret Service agent was shot, and there were just stories flying all over. But my interest was to get behind that picket fence, because that's where that Dallas police officer was headed. And he was in the motorcade. He was a traffic officer. I worked in that area for, probably 7, 8 minutes, maybe, something like that, until I ran on to Mr. and Mrs. Arnold Rowland. Now, Mr. Rowland told me that 15 minutes before the motorcade arrived, he saw 2 men on the 6th floor of the school book depository. Now, one was a white male in the east corner of the 6th floor with a rifle. The other one was a colored male at the west end of the 6th floor, pacing back and forth.
Although Craig had not been assigned to the motorcade detail, he began gathering evidence and taking statements from witnesses almost immediately after the shots were fired. His interview with Rowland was important, for if Rowland saw 2 men on the 6th floor, one of whom held a rifle, then the Warren Commission's preconception of a lone assassin would have been challenged immediately. Craig noted and accurately repeated Rowland's words, although the FBI agent who had also interviewed Rowland in Dealey Plaza did not. Rowland told the Warren Commission when he testified, quote, "The FBI agents didn't seem very interested in the other man on the 6th floor," close quote, and that the FBI agent, quote, "deleted and omitted any reference to the other man in his report to the Warren Commission."